Those in person, thank you so much for making it. And those online, wherever you are, welcome. We're glad to have you on behalf of the China-Africa Working Group and the Sahel Research Group, which is located here at the University of Florida. And I'm Agnes Leslie. I'm the Outreach Director for the Center for African Studies. I also coordinate the China-Africa Working Group. Today's session is on the Russian-Ukraine's war impact on the Sahel. I would like to thank our panelists for agreeing to participate in this session. And at this point, I would like to turn over the session to my colleague, Professor Dominik Kopiński, who will introduce the panelists and moderate the session. Dr. Kopiński is Associate Professor and the head of the International Economic Relations Department at the Institute of Economics at the University of Wrocław, Poland. Dr. Kopiński is also a member of our China-Africa Working Group. Dr. Kopiński, please take it up and introduce our guests and moderate the session. Thank you so much, and thank you everybody for being here in person and online again.
Good morning to America, good afternoon or good evening to participants from Europe and Africa, and warm welcome to all the participants and guests from around the world. Well, it is great to be in Winter Hall at the University of Florida once again, even if remotely. It feels like I was there just yesterday, although it's been now a year since my visit to Gainesville. So as we've heard already, we are kicking off with a fantastic seminar titled "The Impact of the Russia-Ukraine War on the Sahel." And I don't have to tell you, obviously, how timely and critical this topic is. We have two outstanding speakers, Dr. Bakary Sambe, the president of Timbuktu Institute, African Center for Peace Studies, and Dr. Danilo Babić, research fellow at the Institute of International Politics and Economics, the University of Belgrade. This seminar is organized by the China-Africa Working Group, coordinated by Dr. Agnes Ngoma-Leslie in collaboration with the Sahel Research Group, both based at the University of Florida. We also have other members of the China-Africa Working Group here with us, Professor Istvan Taroshi and Dr. Anita Spring. Now, a few housekeeping notes. I would like the panelists, using my authority to ask them to keep their talks to 20 minutes each. And after that, we'll have a Q&A session. While listening the presentations, the participants, online participants can also send their questions via chat, I believe. So I think that would be all from my side. Now, without further ado, Dr. Bakary Sambe, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for your invitation. I'm really glad to discuss with colleagues and also students in Florida University. I'm especially glad because I was invited with the Sahel Research Group to spend some time with your colleague like Leo and the others, and Dr. Khan also. So it is really my pleasure to be here today in order to discuss with you in the very interesting subject regarding Russia-Ukraine war and its impact on the Sahel and implication for China-African relation. So in the summary, we'll try to deal with first the Russia-Ukraine war, how this war has worsened food insecurity in the beginning. There was worry in the region about food security, and you see, for example, in the beginning of the crisis, the trip of President Macky Sall as the president of the African Union to Ukraine and Russia in order to find solution of this unexpected food crisis in the beginning, food insecurity. And after that, we see that China, Russia, and the US are competing for influence in Africa, with Chinese and Russia interests being somewhat aligned in exploiting a wave of anti-Western sentiment, especially in the Sahel. Another point is how China has implemented a government-wide strategy to amplify pro-China, pro-Russia, and anti-Western narratives, including outreach of African leaders and major organizations, as well as covert activities to influence the social media information sphere. And last, it will be about how, despite the negative effect of the Russia-Ukraine war, China's strategy has been effective in positively shaping Sahelian governments and population perception of Russia, of Russia's action in Ukraine and China's continued role in the Sahel. Yes, now regarding the war impact on the Sahel, there is crop yield decreased price and food insecurity, as I have said in the beginning, as Russia and Ukraine were the major supplier for wheat and fertilizer, sugar, and some other products. And also another point is that the attack of the infrastructure and sanction on Russia export have disrupted supply chains, and the Sahelian government spent more on subsidies, and consumers also were affected, as well as the farmers who paid more for common goods like fertilizer. If you see now in this graphic about the way how the fertilizer prices were changing and swinging during this crisis, when we see that the fertilizer prices rose immediately after the start of the war and remain higher than the period before the COVID. And the food insecurity was a real concern, and you can here compare the situation between 2021 and the situation in 2022, where people were really threatened by food insecurity in the region. And also, what about the state of geopolitical competition? If you know that Russia-Ukraine war has intensified geopolitical competition in the Sahel, as China and Russia seek to undermine US influence and provide an alternative. So China, Russia, and the US are competing for primacy in every sector. In the meantime, China and Russia are working together to exploit rising of anti-Western competition. That's why we can say that there was between competition and complementarity, and sometimes some alliance imposed by the situation where the two countries were able to exploit the anti-Western sentiment and the anti-French sentiment. And China has invested in Belt Road Initiative in building influence. And Russia also was prioritizing the mineral extraction and security influence. The US has been also focused on combating violent extremism, development, and democratic consolidation. And there is, in the meantime, from 2020, the series of military coup, which has installed anti-Western military government in multiple countries like Mali, Burkina Faso, and after that, Niger. And here we can see how China and Russia have enhanced engagement to strengthen ties with Sahelian population and the new governments. Now looking at the China positioning, where China were pursuing an all-encompassing information in public diplomacy strategy, we things like a united front, paradoxically, between the Chinese and the Russian, as key part of global effort to supplant US influence with its own. Now, what we can call the united front strategy, it is that there is a kind of co-optation of African leaders and major organizations, civil society, by deploying a very important infrastructure to recruit and to empower some media organization and some member of the civil society, mostly in the Sahel. And there was some high-level meeting organized to brief key African actors and Chinese initiative, and to host also and training on African journalists in media like China Africa Press Center, and in the meantime, funding and establishment of pro-China media organization in Africa. And also the social media influence was really a central issue. When we know that disinformation campaign was led by Russia against the French interests in Mali, and in the meantime, how it was a situation where we see a creation of fake account to amplify Chinese narrative, because China is comparing itself with the French and the others, saying that we are not colonizer, we have any negative background with Africa, and in the meantime, they pay private companies to create fake account as well as influencer increasing followers and pro-China content creation in the region. And we in the Timbuktu Institute, within an agreement with Meta, we were monitoring this way of creating new account and how this campaign of disinformation was a real issue in the global strategy of China and for Russia in the meantime. And if you look to this structure, we can call a united front, you have a very well-organized system from China, from the CCP Central Community, creation of overseas strategy, how government and ministries were involved, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, the Minister of State Security, the United Front Work Department also, and how China tried to take in advantage and facilitate this influence campaign on African journalists and media organizations by inviting them to China, and some brief to African leaders in the meantime, while organizing some forum and also a kind of partnership with key African actors like diplomat, and in order to amplify China's narrative in the region. And in the meantime, this strategy for China, see China's primary intelligence agency responsible for covert social media campaign in the region. It was some main issue on which we have to pay attention. And now, during the war itself, what was the China policy during this war? China was acting and continued to act in concert with Russia to amplify the narrative justifying invasion and opposing Western intervention. With media organizing to broadcast pro-Russia coverage, next stars and second largest provider in Africa, and allows RT, which is Russia Today, and other pro-government Russian outlet to broadcast on its platform, social media disinformation campaign, create, and like, repost, etc., with a huge campaign of empowerment for African journalists. And to develop this pro-Russia narrative that include the invasion is meant to defend Russian sovereignty against NATO expansionism. Ukraine is oppressing Russian speakers while Russia is protecting them. It was the narrative. And you know, the perception are very important here. And here we see the gap between the international conception and the local perception. And China and Russia succeed to play this game in using this gap between the international conception of the conflict and the local perception in the meantime. And I can finish with the potential impact of Chinese policy since the start of the war. Many governments are staying neutral. Perception of China has not changed significantly in the region. And approximately half of African countries have not voted in favor of UN measures supporting Ukraine and or condemning Russia. China is still viewed positively as a partner compared to other countries. And in January 2025, the Timbuktu Institute report states that West Africans increasingly view China and Russia as positive counterweight to Western influence. And if you see some perception about the population data, it means that positive perception in China and the United States declined similarly for 2019 to after the start of the Russia-Ukraine war, and China experiences a smaller decline across West Africa in the Sahel, and it was already perceived more positively than the US in all highlight countries as well as Burkina Faso. It is some figures you can find in with Afrobarometer, who is trying to monitor all these perception during the year by publishing regular reports on it. Now, what about the future of China-Africa relation? China economic, political, and media engagement has strengthened ties between it and an African government and population. That is the reality. And they do not view China as responsible for hardships caused by Russia-Ukraine war. And in the meantime, China is widely viewed as an essential partner, which will likely continue unless impeded by other factors. And you can, so that a lot of sources, you can also have online sources and open sources also we have monitored in order to prepare and to give an idea of this perception, including our studies of the perception of the military and development cooperation in West Africa. Anyway, the war between Ukraine and Russia has a real impact in the Sahel, and mostly in how the image of powers have changed and have evaluated in the region, and how the two countries two powers like Russia and China have taken profit in instrumentalizing the anti-Western sentiment, the anti-French sentiment, in order to have a to differentiate themselves from the Western countries like France and the other, and in somewhere the United States, but mostly against France. Thank you very much for your listening.
Thank you, Bakary. It was an excellent speech. I'm sure it's going to bring some questions later on. Now we're turning to another speaker, Danilo. Are you ready?
Just let me share my screen and start my timer. Oh, I was already introduced, so before I begin, I would just like to thank the organizers for having me and thank Istvan for recommending me as well. So I come from Serbia. Maybe some of you know that Serbia and Yugoslavia before that have very rich history with African countries. But unfortunately, nowadays, I'm the only African researcher in my country. So you can imagine it gets quite lonely for me. So once again, thank you for having me. So let's start. I'm going to analyze the effects of the Russia-Ukrainian war in 4 different areas: energy and resource security, food security, military cooperation, and geopolitical aspects, or as I call it, geopolitical realignment. So let's start. Regarding the energy and the resource security, just a quick difference between Russia and China. So Russia seeks partnerships for oil and gas infrastructure, uranium and other rare earth elements, precious metals, especially since Western sanctions. So they don't want to extract oil and gas. They have plenty of their own. They want to build infrastructure so they can bind the host country to Russia, to make them dependent on Russia energens. On the other hand, China builds infrastructure, and in exchange, because many African countries do not have the cash to pay for these projects, they use natural resources as collaterals. So one more example, this pipeline from Niger to Benin is, as I found out, the longest pipeline, oil pipeline in Africa, with this amazing capacity. I hope that you can see the presentation well. But I would like to point your attention to the fact that Niger military regime borrowed $400 million from the CNPC, China National Petroleum Company, to cover the debt, and it is in a 7% interest rate, which is something new. To my knowledge, China usually uses low interest rates or even zero interest rates when crediting African countries. So this is maybe an indicator that the new phase is starting. Additionally, China agreed to purchase all of the country's oil. This would ensure the survival of the junta regime, but I think it's not particularly good because when you sell all of your oil to only one buyer, that gives that buyer the opportunity to squeeze you if they want to do that later in time. Some negative aspects of this pipeline for China is the attacks of the rebel groups and the terrorist groups on Chinese facilities, which actually forced them to suspend the operation, which is giving them a huge loss financially. There is an alternative in the way of Chad-Cameroon pipeline, but Boko Haram is the issue regarding this project, and probably this project is a no-go from the very beginning. Let's switch to the next one, food security. So I'm gonna use the opportunity that Bakary talked a lot about this. So I'm just gonna point your attention to the picture here. So we can see that the ratio of the grains that were supplied from both Russia and Ukraine. So we can basically see it is mostly Russian wheat and Russian grain if you exclude Somalia and maybe Tunisia. And this is to witness how important that grain deal was in the beginning and how disappointing it was that this deal fell through at the end. So let's see what is China doing regarding the food security. Basically, it's doing three major things: agriculture technology transfer, financial support, and capacity building. Obviously, we don't have the time to read all of this through. I would like to point your attention to hybrids. I think that is very important. So to create new seeds, new, how to say it, species of plants that would be resilient to the harsh African and Sahel climate to increase the yields of agriculture. I think that is very important. Regarding the financial support, in a 5-year plan, China plans to spend $51 billion in African agriculture, especially in the improved irrigation systems, which I think is really important because of the water scarcity in the whole continent, and especially in the Sahel region. And of course, they are building capacities, especially storage facilities. That is, I think, self-explanatory. So let's move on to the military and security cooperations. Sorry? Okay. Before the war, Russia was present through Wagner, usually around 5,000 soldiers, and they offered regime survival packages to the authoritarian regimes in Africa. They used a simple three-way strategy. So they were disputing a Western narrative in Africa, in Western Africa. They were securing resource concessions, especially gold, which is the case in Sudan, but that is another story. and they were embedding themselves in military structures of the host country, training, advisory, counterinsurgency, and counterintelligence. Of course, Russia is the biggest arms supplier in Africa because their weapons is cheap and very effective and easy to use, which is proven once again in the Ukrainian battlefield. What was China doing before the war? Chinese engagement, in my opinion, was structured and institutionalized with limited military footprint. So Beijing was cautious regarding direct military interventions, and they were using peacekeeping and some police law enforcement cooperation, as well as limited training programs of the African armed forces and police. They were focused on economic security of Chinese business endeavors, deploying private military companies in some key areas. The example of that was the evacuation of Chinese citizens when the Libyan civil war started more than 10 years ago from this time point. So this approach allowed China to balance its traditional non-interference principle with the need to secure and protect its own economic interests. So what happened after the beginning of the war? In my opinion, we can see the China policy shift. So as early as in April 2022, they announced the China Global Security Initiative. It's a very long document, but in essence, I believe it is a break from the traditional non-interference policy, and it reflects Chinese aspiration to be a global security provider, or as they like to say it, norm creator, not a norm follower, but a norm creator. The engagement with African armies increased significantly after that. So we have all different kinds of military drills with Tanzania, with Mozambique, with Nigeria, Brazil, Cameroon. I think you can read all of that. What is the point? The PLA, so Chinese army, right, sees Africa as a stepstone, especially for far seas operation. They are using the Africa's low priority in the Western media to increase their military footprint in Africa, attracting as little attention as they can. Okay, next slide. In August 2024, the biggest military exercise so far has taken place. It was a joint command exercise, naval exercise with Mozambique and Tanzania. So the goal is strategic force projection. So China wants to prove that its navy is capable of conducting blue water operations, so distant from land, blue water operations. And another important exercise was the MOSI 2 exercise in February 2023, which was a joint exercise between China, Russia, and South Africa. This was to send a strong message because the exercise was conducted at the same time as the anniversary of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Okay, let's go to the final segment. So we can see here the results of the resolutions in the United Nations General Assembly against Russia. So we can see that in the beginning of the war, African countries were cautious regarding Russia, and they were, let's say, neutral or just maybe slightly pro-Russian. So the point is that Russia started the African Charm Offensive after the beginning of the war, not before that. So on the left side, you have some timeline on significant events in the Sahel region. I'm quite sure that you are aware of them. I would just like to leave the cliffhanger why Mamadi Doumbouya and the Republic of Guinea is not the part of the alliance of the Sahel states and the other countries are. We can discuss that later. On the right side, we can see the effects of the Russia-Africa summit. So Russia offered weapons, intelligence cooperation. They fixed the grain problem, offering free food, basically. They were expanding trade and offered to work and develop African financial sector. My thesis here is that Russia did not cause the military coups. Perhaps it was their catalyst, and they are riding the wind of change in Western Africa quite well, in my opinion. So there is a difference between Russia and China approach. As you can see, thus far, Russia is using a basically military approach, that is, its battering ram in Africa, while China, on the other hand, uses a holistic economic and developmental approach. I would just like to point your attention to the fact that I believe that Russia-Africa alliance is not that, Russia-China alliance in Africa is not that tight. It's not that united, maybe, but it is quite loose, using the BRICS as a platform, as a wide platform. But I think because of the war, the Russia's ability to expand its African engagement is quite limited, and that Russia in this phase will focus on just to sustain those relationships. Regarding the African countries, I believe that various African nations will try to hedge and improve their relationships, improve their position by hedging between China, Russia, and the global West. I'm running out of time, but I would like to just mention the Africa Peace Plan regarding the Russia-Ukrainian conflict. I think that is very important because for the first time in a very long while, Africa has asserted itself as a subject of the international relations and not just the object of international relations. So let's talk about the American policy. I believe that is an interest of yours. So in the first Trump mandate, engagement with Africa was limited, and it was a secondary priority, or maybe even not even a secondary priority to Trump's foreign policy. It was focused on bilateral agreements. It was the development aid and US aid projects were cut. Focus was on combating terrorist organizations, and unfortunately, the S-word incident marked the US-Africa relations in a very bad way, obviously. Regarding the second term, of course, it's too early to tell, There were no mentions of Africa in the campaign, to my knowledge. The Trump administration is really busy, I believe we can all say that, and it is unclear and doubtful whether the African desk will be able to squeeze their issues on the agenda. In my opinion, the administration will prioritize business-to-business ties and promote economic growth through the free market and business principles, and further reducing development assistance, which is, I think, already happening with all of the USAID things going around. It is already happening, so the dismantling of Power Africa initiative, which has been in place since 2013, to increase the electricity capacities, so that's already happening. And I also believe that President Trump will focus on critical minerals. And the last slide for today and conclusion. I believe that China sees the opportunity as Russia struggles. I believe that China will be the next world hegemon, and I believe that hegemon does not need a companion. So the alliance with Russia is temporary at best. So their activities in Africa, in my opinion, are largely separate because Russia does not have the capacity to follow China, to match China in Africa. China has much more resources. Again, they have one same goal, to counter the Western dominance. But I believe beyond that and beyond BRICS, this is not a tight partnership as, I don't know, USA and Britain or the European Union or something like that. I believe that relationship is competitive rather than cooperative, and that West overestimates the China-Russia connection in Africa, only in Africa. I believe it's some kind of a passive alliance. So I believe I'm in time. I didn't breach time for too much. Thank you very much for your attention and for the opportunity to speak here.
Danilo, for a very comprehensive but also insightful presentations. Yes, your time discipline was perfect. So if I may, I'd like to open the floor for questions from Grinter Hall. Because I don't see any questions on chat.
We have Thank you so much for the presentations. I have a question about step here so we can see.
Sure. I mean, it is true. Yeah.
Could you talk about maybe both of you about the prospects for China and Russia having deep connections with the societies in Africa and with the civil society? I know Dr. Bakary mentioned initiatives around media and could you talk more about the possibility of the connections and relations between not just governments, but between China, Russia, and the society?
I don't know whether Dominik wants to take a round of questions or just take them.
Dominik, maybe
let's take a couple of questions, right? Let's take a couple of questions and then let the presenters tackle them.
There's a question. Do you have a question? Miles has a question. Go ahead.
Thanks very much. Two brilliant presentations. I wanted to ask a bit about what governments in the Sahel are doing in relation to this very rapidly changing situation. And I'm trying to get on camera. But the camera is moving. So the question, I guess, is what challenges do the Sahelian governments now face in their relations with both China and Russia? The Chinese relationship has been built over a period with in some ways alongside Western decline, but also Russia is there now as a very disruptive element, potentially positive, but also changing and destabilizing the existing relationships in quite a quick period. So I just wondered if either of the speakers could speak a bit about what the challenges are for the Sahelian governments and what evidence do we have of how they're responding to the challenges and the opportunities and the risks in this situation.
Okay, thank you. May I propose to take two more questions, just not to overwhelm us presenters with too many questions. So two more questions, please.
There was a question from Istvan, Dominik.
Wait in the room.
Istvan, yes.
Yes, yes.
Istvan,
Hello.
please, yes.
Yes, hello everybody. Thank you, Bakary and Danilo, for the great presentations. Bakary, you were talking about, and I quote, China and Russia and the United States competing for primacy in every sector. I do not think that these three actors compete with each other in every sector, as their weight globally and regionally differ substantially. And I think it is simply impossible for Russia to compete with any of the other two in every sector, as it doesn't have the capabilities and capacities and probably nor the interest. So, and even I would say that the China-US competition has been changing day by day, as the United States under the second Trump administration has been withdrawing from many sectors actually in Africa too. So my question to you, how do you see this geopolitical competition taking shape under the second Trump administration? And to Danilo, again, talking about this geopolitical kind of context, and saying that, talking about, these geopolitical realignments and Russia's African charm offensive. So does it have, does Russia have the capabilities, Danilo, to compete with even China from the charm perspective, if I may? And one additional remark, I don't think that the Kingdom of Eswatini has established ties with the PRC. So not all African countries are in diplomatic relation with the PRC. Thank you.
Thank you. I think these were quite dense and multi-layered questions, so we let the presenters handle them now, and we go for the round number two. Who wants to go first? Danilo?
Okay, yeah, I can go first. So I was able to note three questions, right? The first one is the connections with the African peoples, right? Russia and Chinese connections with African people. So, well, there are historic ties. During the Cold War, the original Cold War, each African country that was in the communist team, right, had some connections with both Russia and China, especially Russia. And to my knowledge, Mali had, for instance, significant ties with the Soviet Union. So in some ways, I believe that Russia is building on to that Soviet legacy in Africa. And we all know that all of the great powers after the World War II were actually trying, both the USA and the SSSR were trying to dismantle the colonial blocks in Africa. So that was, of course, positive for African countries, but the negative point was the proxy relationship after that. And of course, okay, Ethiopia is a single country, but it's a very important country. And there are traditional ties because of the Orthodoxy. Russian Orthodox Church and the Ethiopian Church have certain types of connections. Regarding China as well, we know that China facilitated and helped the independence movements all across Africa. So that is a deep historical connection. And nowadays, China has a fantastic soft power tools in Africa, much better than Russia. So they are building stadiums, they are building schools, they offer classes of Chinese language and so on and so on. Do you want me to stop or go to the second question and third question right away?
Yes, please continue.
Okay. So the second questions were the challenges regarding the Russia and China, the challenges for Sahelian countries regarding Russia and China, right? So there are challenges regarding Russia. I think the security is the challenge, because you cannot lean on anyone else to provide security for you. I mean, at some point in time, you have to take back your own security in your own hands. So you cannot be dependent on Russia, because we all saw what happened in Syria. It's not Africa, but it is a great example what can happen if you sit back, enjoy the ride, and rely on the foreign actor, in this case, in both cases, Russia, to maintain your security. So you must be able to protect yourself. And of course, that was not the question, but I like to mention that we have military regimes in almost all of the Sahel countries. The biggest challenge is transferring the power to the civilian structure. That is always the biggest challenge for any military government. Challenges regarding China is, of course, not to be over-dependent on China. There is a famous China debt trap narrative, right? I believe we all heard about that. I disagree with that. And some of the more famous authors than I, such as Deborah Brautigam, also discredited the China debt trap narrative. It's only one case in Sri Lanka, and it was basically the fault of Sri Lankan government. So I believe that is a myth, or as Deborah called it, internet meme. But nevertheless, you must be careful in borrowing and not to be too dependent on only one partner. I believe that is the main challenge. And the final question from my dear friend Ishtvan, the capacities of Russia for charm offensive vis-a-vis China. Well, I believe that Russia has the charm. They have the charm capacity, but they don't have the fuel, the energy, the capacity to fulfill that charm. They can say all of these nice things, make nice promises, but they simply do not have the resources to compete with China. I think nobody has the resources to compete with China. Okay, USA has probably the resources, but they don't have the interest. European Union has the interest, but does not have resources. That is my opinion. Russia can do an isolated segment by segment, sector by sector approach, something similar as India, right? But they cannot match China. So they have charm, but they don't have the power. Thank you.
Thank you, Danilo. Bakary, do you have your own perspective on the questions?
Yes, it was the first the question about my colleague who would not agree, saying that I have said that China, Russia, and the United States was competing in everything. No, I don't think so. Perhaps it's a misunderstanding. I think that there is a kind of division of the work, we say division du travail in French, and where you see that US until this last time was focused on influence in the Sahel without any huge military presence, with military presence, but not intervening like France. China was interested by business, and Russia was focusing on security. And so I think that every power has his objectives. And I think that now, globally, the situation is, okay, because we are asking the question in the perspective of the US, but what about the perspective of the Africans themselves? Where we know that it is really a new time, a new situation in the region, where we see the most of the partners who was competing or complementing each other. There is a kind of decline, sure, risk of what we call democracy. And the new situation in the region is we have to face a situation where we have to choose between different partners. There is in a situation where you have not this dichotomy between democratic and autocratic. So we are in a new era globally in which it is international competition without values. No one will talk about democracy, and if we think about Trump now, pragmatism is the most shared thing between the powers in a competition in a region without this opposition between autocratic and democratic, and where we have to play in a ground where the situation is competition, international competition, but without values. The missing link will be the values, and what will be the criteria of choosing a partner. It will be just pragmatism. It's in globalization of pragmatism, and which is now strengthened by the Trump number two, which is not very different from the Trump number one, and it is the new situation in the region. And I think that if we don't take into account this perception from the Africans themselves, who first say, okay, now we have the choice. Secondly, okay, we have to be more pragmatic, like as pragmatic as our partners, which are competing without any values. And third is we are facing a new situation where there is a rise of new African elite without any complexity regarding the West, more and more educated, but in a very troubled time of disinformation and misinformation. But the most important thing is, and the most worrying thing from our perspective here, is how to deal with a situation where we have to choose partners, but there is not the criteria of values. Thank you.
Thank you, Bakary. Okay. Do we have any other questions from the audience, from my online participants?
You have one here, yeah.
We have one here.
Yes, excellent. Yes, go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah, mine is a quick one on, you talked about the values, and I was trying to think about how these partnerships come about. I think there was somebody who mentioned about the China teaching people language, the Chinese language in Africa, a community of African languages here. And I'm trying to think, in essence, we know that students or learners are supposed to be taught in a familiar language, especially at foundational level. We see a lot of, maybe a lot of this partnership, maybe a little bit more, gravitating towards one direction, whereby maybe the leaders are choosing what they want to focus on, not basically on trying to look at how the people will benefit. But maybe he said because they want to, it's because of the policies that the parties are setting. He said because of the values that some of the leaders have. Or do they really do, evidence-based kind of, research to find out what things they should focus on, basically based on the most important factors, and finally, and do this partnership are they tied on looking at who is most competitive for the time being on pressing needs that these countries are facing, or it is based on what is brought on the table at that time? I'm asking this because there is not criteria that has been set on the partnership or model that we see. I'm not an expert in this partnership, but as an international development expert, I look at it from different lenses, from development theories, from geopolitical alignment, but also the leaders that we elect. It said that sometimes we don't have the right leaders, so some of the decisions that they focus on are not the most pressing, needs that they should focus on, because they forget the foundational aspects sometimes.
Thank you. If I read correctly, these are two separate questions. Do you have any particular speaker in mind to answer this question? So this is just general to both of our panelists.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question. Dominik,
yes,
Dominik, I have a question. Can I go?
Of course.
Okay. Thank you so much. And thank you to our presenters, Bakary and Danilo. That was excellent presentations and, took us further than, the Sahel in terms of our understanding of this situation. Two questions. Bakary, you talked about the pro-China creation content, which actually I think is trying to position China in a way that, it can actually bring people towards China. My question, I think, is related to the first question, which was asked earlier. Is there a counterattack or a counter approach from the Sahelian countries, especially in terms of trying to reposition themselves and counter this narrative? And the second question is for Danilo. Danilo, you talked about the realigning of countries from, increasing towards Russia, or deciding not to vote against the resolution for China to censor Russia. I'm wondering, what was it in particular that actually led to this realignment, the increase in the countries? And could you speak a little bit more about the critical minerals? Because the critical minerals appears is going to become a contentious thing now, with the United States stepping in, Russia and China. Could you actually, add more content to that in terms of critical minerals? Thank you.
Thank you, Agnes. Okay, so maybe this time, Bakary, how about you? Can you handle those questions? And then we go to Danilo. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for this question. Regarding the pro-China content, the thing is China is positioning itself as a country without any negative background with Africa, like no colonialism, nothing. Yes, okay. And taking profit in the French perception, the perception of French with African young people. So China is positioning itself. China is not involved in any critical issue. They say, okay, we are different. We have never colonized Africa, and we are providing development infrastructure, and we are not here to criticize your values or to intervene in democracy or everything. We are not coming to teach you some values or to impose anything. So there is a very passive reaction toward China from the African countries. So they have a different attitude with Russia, For example, it depends on the country, like in Senegal or we are in Cote d'Ivoire, for example, saying that Russia is supporting the IS countries. So regarding China, there is no challenge. Apparently, there is no challenge. They just China is, yes, deploying its strategy very freely with media, and in the meantime, Turkey also with its media is covering like most a lot of countries, and there is this kind of competition, but there is no focus from the African leaders or African civil society in China, especially. But the real issue is, okay, the competition between the West and Russia in the context of the Ukrainian war and the context of competition between the West, between the Russia and not NATO countries. Thank you.
Thank you. Danilo?
Turn. So let me start with the last question actually. Regarding the critical minerals, right? Yes, I also believe this is very important because all of these minerals are important for the technology and for the green transition and for microchips and mobile phones and other gadgets and devices. And I have to say, you know, what is green in Europe and America, it's not very green in Congo or in some other African country. So we can see how important this is on Ukrainian example. So the decision for the peace deal is actually based on whether the Ukraine will give concession or just give the resources to the United States. Regarding the African context, regarding the Sahel, all of us could saw how important the Niger was for France. I think that is precisely because of the critical elements, rare earth elements. And but in my opinion, the bigger and scarier example is the Democratic Republic of Congo and what is happening right now, the M23 insurgency. And I will make a bold statement because only maybe 8 months ago, European Union made a memorandum with Rwanda regarding critical elements, critical minerals. I wonder why with Rwanda, because you don't have plenty of these resources in Rwanda, but you have them in the Eastern DRC. So I believe that is a very twisted, very evil game is being played in the Eastern Congo right now, and I believe that bigger players are behind the curtains, much bigger players than M23 and Rwanda itself. Regarding the realignment, what led to the realignment? Well, why were African countries so, let's say, neutral at the beginning of the war? I think that is the consequence of, how to say, disillusion with the West for the past, I don't know, 15 or 20 years. So I believe that African leaders, African elites, correctly noticed that the influence of the global West is decreasing, deteriorating, and they were cautious not to condemn Russia too quickly. And let's not diminish the success of maybe Russian diplomacy in Africa, which was able to explain the Russian position in the conflict. So African countries just just appreciated that opinion. So they are no longer accepting the narratives from the West on the face value. I can, if you allow me, give an example from my country. So in the year 2008 and before that, when Kosovo declared unilateral independence from Serbia, many African countries tomorrow recognized the independence of Kosovo under the pressure of the USA and the European Union. 10 or 15 years later, that is not the case, and many African countries withdrew the recognition of Kosovo. So that is the example how the influence of the West is diminishing. And the first question was actually about, can somebody remind me, please?
John.
So,
About
language.
The second question was regarding any particular event or process that made this turn of the Sahel countries towards Russia, if I remember correctly.
What made them turn towards Russia? Right?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Is there anything in the past that was the kind of spark?
Yeah. I understand. Well, I believe once again the local actors realized that they have a security vacuum. So the France was unwilling or unable, I would like to say unwilling, to provide the security for the Sahelian countries. I even have once again a bold statement. I believe that France in some way use the various insurgency groups as how to say, a tool for punishing and putting back the African Sahelian leaders in line. So when they were trying to make any kind of decision that was against French interests, suddenly some kind of a terrorist or insurgency group popped up in their country. The example for that is Blaise Compaoré in Burkina Faso. So all of these years when he was president, Burkina Faso was safe. And when he left, when other actors in Burkina Faso appeared and they just started thinking to have some different policy than what French vision was, terrorist groups appeared in Burkina Faso. So I believe that Sahelian elites just wanted a different security provider and they recognize that Russia can do that. But I reiterate, I believe you have to take your own security in your own hands.
Thank you, Danilo, for this extensive answer. Yes, Agnes.
I would like to request some of our colleagues from the Sahel Research Group to make some comments related especially to the Sahel or to ask questions.
And I think you're looking at Renata specialist, and I'm correct like this.
I'm looking at three people. I'm looking at Ablai, Leo, and Renata.
No, well, I'd like to thank,
Yes.
I'd like to, okay, I'm Leo Bialon here. Thank Bakary, of course, who I know very long and for a long time, and Danilo for these excellent presentations. I thought they're really extremely insightful and forced us to see things in ways somewhat different from what our usual discussion, and especially by adding in, thank you, Agnes, for organizing it, because the sort of China-Russia rivalry in the area. We talked a lot about Russia and the Russian presence, and we used to talk a lot about the China presence, but as independent. And I think in this context, it's really yeah, it's quite fascinating. I do think the differences that were highlighted were really important. I mean, the Russian strategy is primarily one of military security, and others in the China, less of the sort of soft power. I think is what John just left was asking about, sort of things like building ties, the education focus, Chinese students. African students with scholarships in China, etc. And so highlighting that, I think, has been really quite interesting. So that's a comment. It's not a question. I think this has been really insightful for us. I don't know if others have questions specifically from the Sahelian context. Well, no, I'll leave it there.
I can add something that I found really insightful as we're analyzing data that's coming in. Two things from the presentation I think that were highlighted. One, the importance of hybrid seeds. That's something that I've been reading a lot in the interviews that are coming from Kaffrine, which is the peanut basin in Senegal. A lot of the farmers are expressing like, yeah, if you have the hybrid seeds that are quickly growing, that's helpful. And that kind of sets you up for success. And then the other issue is fertilizer. And a lot of the farmers said you cannot plant like before without fertilizer, because it's all about the yields are not the same if you don't use fertilizer. So seeing how fertilizer price went up as food security went down is kind of what we're seeing in our research study.
Our economist here, Renata, go ahead.
I wasn't thinking of, hi, everybody. Hi, Dominic and everybody. I really appreciated that both presentations were great. Maybe I have a question following Agnes' question on the counter narratives. So to Bakary Sambe, he showed to us the Afrobarometer data showing a shifting in perceptions, which I think is useful. But I was thinking if the Timbuktu Institute at some point, what is your other sources for detecting perceptions in sort of changes in perceptions in the countries you work in? I think you alluded to some either data or anecdotal evidence about, this perception of these two countries, if there's anything coming from the ground, basically. This is my question to Bakary Sambe. If there's anything beyond what we can see globally, I think both of you have really well described. Maybe just one question. And you alluded, Bakary Sambe alluded to the Africa 2025 report, which we are going to look forward to read. And I am in your email list, so I'm really excited to see where it comes from. And maybe if you can tell us again, the sources, because I believe you have really a hold on the ground, and you can maybe tell us a little bit of the, different layers and degrees.
Before your response, Abrai, do you have a quick comment or a quick question? Really, so that they can take them together.
Thank you, Bakary, and to all the speakers. I was just, you mentioned the role of social media, and especially the Russia kind of influence. And you have a number of influencers like the Beninese, French, Kemi Seba, and others who are really being paid by Russia to spread all these fake news about French. And I was just wondering whether you see similar use of social media by China, and to what end, right? Because we know that China does use that probably, in the West, but I wonder if you have similar kind of interventions from China. And maybe the last question is about the backlash. I remember Ukraine celebrated the killing of some of these Russian soldiers and also Malian military forces in the north, and that created a lot of backlash in Africa. People coming out against Ukraine and under the influence of the IS countries. So is that still something that is ongoing, or does people view differently Ukraine now?
You're wanting it.
Thank you. Okay, that was an extensive list of questions. I
Yes.
believe, Bakary, you can start answering them right now, right?
Yes, thank you very much. I know. I think that it is important to state, to know that in the country there is some in the region this sort of some three elements which is very important, which are very important in order to have a full understanding on of the ongoing situation beyond the debate of global influence like Russia. Firstly, we have this impression of that we live in a divided world in which alignment are both multiple and diffuse, and we see that with Russia and China's influence. Secondly, we are in the midst of a world in which the distribution of power is highly fragmented, with the combined effect of classic power in decline and emerging powers on the rise, and a multiple of states claiming middle power like Turkey, like other countries. And thirdly, and we have to keep it in mind, we are in the presence of an Africa and the Sahel, which, thanks to the dual effect of an uninhibited elite and a more demanding population, is seeking to make the most of international relations. In this context, Africa and the region, people in the region consider that our region is moving from an acquired zone to one in which, from now on, any significant influence could decide the balance of power on an international scale. This is the perception. And this at a time when complex balancing acts are unfolding in the continent through a mechanism whereby the classic great power ensure that the continent's strategic tilt can change the configuration of power. And if we don't pay attention to this shift, we'll remain in this conflict of perception of the conflict between the international conception and the local perception. That's why when talking about Russian disinformation, people here think that there is a lot of kind of disinformation, the Western disinformation, the Russian disinformation, and the Chinese one. Regarding China now, China is in a strategy in low profile, trying to empower the journalists, to invite them to Beijing, to give some, to broadcast via CGTN information, and to have huge influence on journalists. I don't know if there are some influencers like Kemi Seba for the Russia against the French or Natalie Yam, but what we can see is currently China is organizing some trips, some scholarship to China in order to have influence. Now, regarding the other sources beyond Afrobarometer and the other and the global trend, sometime in our last study of the perception study we have run in 4 countries like Togo, Senegal, Niger, and Cote d'Ivoire, is using CAP methodology to have the perception. And also, in the meantime, beyond the study, we organize sometimes some webinar discussing with these young people, like the one of the study we have run around about how the young generation, like as if the young people in Africa reject democracy or they want to indigenize democracy. We try to mitigate global trends with some very locally methodology in order to capture the different trends which are very difficult to capture, but we are trying to do our best in this in order to mitigate the global data with perception studies and taking into account the change of the opinion, public opinion, and very complex situation in the region.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And Danilo, I think we have just a couple of minutes left. So if you want to have some final say and final conclusion to those questions in general, please.
Just two short comments. So regarding it was like the Russian disinformation campaign, right? That was the question. So I believe that France was the primary target of that campaign, if I'm not mistaken. And I would just like to say, I mean, you don't have to do much to make an anti-French narrative. I mean, French did so many wrongs in Western Africa, in Sahel, in Central African Republic. So you just have to explain to the people what they did. And even those people who didn't know that, when they realized what happened, I mean, you don't have to do much to make people dislike France, at least in my opinion. And regarding the Ukraine and the incident in the northern Mali, I think the town was what was it called? Tinzouten in the border with Algeria, right? I mean, I believe that was very counterproductive from the Ukrainian side in two different ways. And the first way, I mean, who are you helping? You are helping the terrorists. So why are you doing that? And the second question, I mean, Ukraine was in the eyes of the media portray itself as the victim of Russian aggression, which is of course true. It is the victim. But why are you conducting, I mean, offensive operations in the distant theater? I mean, why is that your business? Focus on your country, try to do something, try to end the war. You're obviously losing. People are getting killed. The country was devastated. I mean, why are you meddling in the African affairs? So I believe that was very counterproductive. That's it.
Thank you, Danilo. Okay, guys. So to wrap up, we had in both presentations that the security vacuum in the Sahel has increasingly been filled by Chinese economic engagement and Russia's security presence. And of course, as we also heard, the approaches may differ, the appetite is definitely different, the capacity is surely different. For instance, my view is that Russia's power and leverage in the Sahel is constantly overblown in the media for some reason that I cannot really comprehend. But both countries definitely are cementing their influence in the region and reshaping the geopolitical landscape in the process. So the big question is whether this shift will lead to some sort of long-term stability or create perhaps a new form of dependency for the region. Another big question, the one that is emerging now as we speak, is whether this vacuum will continue to grow given the apparent rapid decline in US interest in the global South. This is just happening on our watch, right? So on behalf of the China-Africa Working Group and Sahel Group, I want to thank you all for your time, insights, and attendance in this online seminar. Particularly big thanks and here applause to our panelists for their fantastic contributions. You've been great. And I hope this session provided a clearer perspective on the challenges and opportunities for in the Sahel. And looking, of course, forward to continuing this conversation in the future sessions. I'm sad that we cannot join you for refreshments, so grab some Coke and then slice of pizza for us.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, and take care and see you next time.
Thank you so much, Dominik, for coordinating this wonderfully. Thank you so much. This was an excellent presentation. Thank you, Bakary, all the way, Thank you so much.
Thank you. I see Winter Hall. Yes, and my student, are happy.
Yes, thank you. Oh, wonderful. Oh, my goodness. Thank you so much.
Yes.
I want to know, were you teaching Wolof? Why is all the Wolof behind you?
No, what do you say?
I see that on the board behind you, there's a Wolof lesson or somebody.
This
was
was,
writing
of
down
course,
Wolof.
yes. But you can, I'm so happy to see Grinta Hall. Yes, I'm
Yes,
very
yes,
glad.
yes. We are happy to see everybody. Thank you
Yes.
for everybody.
Thank
Show us
you.
the picture of them again. Show us the picture again. Show us the
Yeah,
picture
yeah.
of the people. Yes.
Yes.
Oh, wow. Let me take a picture. Let me take a picture. Let me take a picture. Thank you. Oh, that's
Okay.
wonderful. Thank you, everybody. Sorry you can't join us. We'll drink on your
Okay, thank
behalf.
you.
Yes,
Yes.
yes. And
Cheers,
Dominic,
enjoy
thanks
it.
again.
I was there.
Danilo,
Thank you,
and my
guys.
friend Ispan.
Thank you so much.
Big hugs to all of you, dear
Bye.
friends. Bye.
Thank you from Greta. This
Yes.
was wonderful. Yes, yes.
bye-bye.
Thank you so much. Thank you,
Good night.
thank you, thank
you.
you.
Bye-bye,
Really
guys.
appreciate it.
Bye-bye.
Yes, yes.
Bye.
Really appreciate it. You can stop
Okay.
recording. Thank you. Oh my gosh.
That was excellent.